Ever walk out of a meeting, a presentation, maybe even just a casual conversation, feeling like, yeah, I nailed that, totally confident, only to find out later, maybe it went totally sideways.
Ugh, tell me about it.
Yeah, we've all been there, right?
We have.
So today's deep dive, that's what we're diving into, self-awareness. We've
Yes.
got a whole stack of insights from Harvard Business Review articles
Mm,
because, sometimes we all need a little help figuring out how we come across to other people, right?
absolutely. And what's so fascinating is that self-awareness, it isn't just one thing. Like researchers for decades
Mm.
have been trying to really pin it down. And one of the biggest aha moments is that there's actually two sides to self-awareness: internal and external self-awareness.
Okay, so let's unpack that a little bit. Internal self-awareness, that's kind of how we see ourselves, right?
Right.
Our own values, strengths, weaknesses, how we think we react in a crisis. It's like
Yeah.
that inner voice. So am I nailing it or did I totally bomb?
Exactly. And then external self-awareness
Mhm.
is how other people see us. So it's perception versus reality. You might think you're coming across as, confident, capable, but other people might see maybe overbearing or dismissive, and that's where things get really tricky.
Yeah, that's where the wheels can come off.
Yes.
It's like how sometimes you think you're like totally rocking it at work and then it turns out you've totally missed the mark.
Yeah.
This happened to me actually recently, and it's a perfect example of this gap between internal and external self-awareness.
Really?
Yeah, I was so sure I was like killing it on this project.
Yeah.
I put in the hours, the presentation went smoothly. I felt fantastic. I actually even told you.
You did.
Eh?
You were sure you were getting a promotion.
Yeah, I was like, bring on that promotion. But then my manager called me in for a little chat. And it turns out that my communication style had been rubbing a few people the wrong way. I was coming across as way too assertive, like almost dismissive of other people's ideas, which was so not my intention.
Wow.
Yeah, I was totally blindsided.
And that's the thing. You can be so introspective, so in tune with your own thoughts and feelings, and still have absolutely no clue how you're being perceived by the people around you.
It's true.
The research actually shows that there's very little relationship between internal self-awareness and external self-awareness.
Wow. Okay, so then how do we bridge that gap? How do we get a clearer picture of ourselves from both perspectives?
So Tasha Eurich, she's done a ton of research on this, and she talks about these 4 different self-awareness archetypes. And it's this really great way to kind of think about where your own opportunities for growth might be.
Okay, I love a good archetype.
Right.
Lay it on me.
Okay, so first you've got your introspectors, and they're always reflecting, constantly analyzing their every move. But the thing is, they may not be seeking out feedback from others, so they're missing that really crucial outside perspective. Then you have your pleasers, and they're so focused on how other people see them that they might actually be neglecting their own needs, their own values. Like they're trying so hard to be liked that they're losing sight of kind of their own internal compass.
Right.
And then we have the seekers. They're actively trying to understand themselves better. They're asking questions, but they may not have found the right tools or strategies to really tap into that external self-awareness.
So they're on the right path, but they don't necessarily have all the,
The tools.
yeah, the tools, the map.
Exactly.
Which brings us to the kind of holy grail of self-awareness, the aware leaders.
They're like the unicorns
They are.
of the self-awareness world.
Yes.
Highly self-aware, both internally and externally. They know themselves really well, but they're also constantly seeking feedback, and most importantly, they're actually using all of that information to learn and grow.
Okay, so this is like who you want to be, right?
Yeah.
I mean, the articles talked about less stress, better decisions, stronger relationships. They even said higher salaries, like all linked to self-awareness.
Yeah, it's huge. And, when you think about it, self-awareness is really the foundation for so many other, critical skills, right?
Mm-hmm.
Empathy, communication, leadership. It all starts with understanding yourself.
Okay, so self-awareness, it's like the superpower, right, for our careers, our relationships, just generally being less stressed out. So you'd think the more experience you have in life, the more self-aware you'd naturally become.
It makes sense, right? Like you learn from your mistakes.
Exactly.
You kind of figure out what works, what doesn't. It's like leveling up in a video game, right?
Yeah.
But Eurich's research actually found that experience, especially when it comes with power and seniority, can sometimes make us less self-aware.
Hold on. Are you saying that all those years on the job, all those wins, and maybe some epic fails along the way might actually make me less self-aware?
It seems counterintuitive.
Totally.
But think about it. Senior leaders, they have fewer people above them who are going to give them honest feedback. The kind of feedback that maybe isn't always positive, maybe a little critical.
Yeah, no one wants to be the one to tell the CEO they totally messed up the presentation, even if it could have saved the company millions of dollars.
Exactly. And the higher up you go, the more likely you are to be surrounded by people who, let's face it, are incentivized to agree with you, to tell you what you want to hear.
Ooh, that's scary. So it's like the higher you climb, the less clearly you can see.
It can be a real trap.
So how do we avoid falling into that trap? How do we make sure that we stay open to feedback even when we're, the ones calling the shots?
It takes a real conscious effort. Like one of the big takeaways from all these articles is that it's so important to actively seek feedback. Even, and this is key, even when it's not explicitly offered. And not just from, like, our bosses or superiors, because, let's be real, sometimes they're the ass ones to tell us what we really need to hear.
Okay, so then we need to find those, what do they call them? Loving critics, the articles mention.
Yeah.
People who are going to tell us the truth, even if it's hard to hear, even if it stings a little bit. But how do you find those people? And how do you make it safe for them to be honest with you?
An $80 question.
Yeah, yeah.
I think it comes down to building relationships that are based on trust and mutual respect. It's about creating a culture in our workplaces, our teams, even in our personal lives, where giving and receiving feedback is seen as a gift, not a punishment. And it's on us as individuals to really make it clear that we value that honesty even when it's tough.
We need that outside perspective. It's like that saying, you can't read the label when you're inside the jar.
Right.
But this whole idea that experience can hinder self-awareness, it really got me thinking. If it's not just about racking up years on the job, how do we get better at this whole self-awareness thing?
Well, one thing that I think often gets maybe overplayed a little is introspection. We tend to think that just because we're, reflecting on our thoughts and our feelings that we're automatically becoming more self-aware. But it's not always the case.
Wait, you can do introspection wrong.
You can.
I thought that was like the bare minimum, just like thinking about yourself.
Right. But a lot of us, and I'm guilty of this too, we get stuck in what the researchers call the why trap.
The why trap. Okay, tell me more. The why trap. Okay, so tell me more about this why trap and how we can avoid falling into it.
So it's like this. When we're trying to understand, our emotions or how we reacted in a certain situation, we tend to ask ourselves these why questions, right? Like, why did I say that? Or why am I feeling so annoyed right now? Or even, why can't I be more like, so-and-so?
Oh, 100%. I do that all the time. Like, seriously, all the time.
We all do it. It's so common. But the thing is, our brains, as amazing as they are actually really terrible at, accurately answering those why questions, especially when it's about our own emotions. We end up, creating these elaborate stories that sound good on the surface, that justify our actions or feelings, but they might not actually be the whole truth. And oftentimes they just lead to more self-criticism, more frustration, that kind of thing.
It's like a downward spiral.
Exactly.
So if asking why is basically a recipe for self-sabotage, what's the alternative? What are we supposed to do?
Shift your focus from why to what.
What? Okay, I'm going to need an example. What does that actually look like?
So instead of stewing on that question, why did I react so badly in that meeting? Try asking yourself, what specifically triggered that reaction? Or what emotions was I actually feeling in that moment? Or even what could I have done differently?
Okay. So it's like, instead of digging for some deep hidden reason like, why am I the way that I am? It's more about looking at the situation objectively. Focusing on, the facts, what actually happened.
Exactly. And it's not only, I think, a more accurate way to approach it, but it's also way more empowering.
Oh, so?
Because instead of, dwelling on the past, you're shifting your focus to what you can learn from that experience and how you can actually grow.
Okay, I can see that. So we've talked about a lot today, internal versus external self-awareness, those fascinating archetypes.
The unicorns.
The unicorns, right. The importance of seeking feedback, and of course this whole idea of the why trap. But I feel like we need a toolbox here. What are some really practical things that we can all do, starting right now, to become more self-aware, both internally and externally?
That's the best part. There are actually tons of simple but really powerful strategies. One of my personal favorites is using data to understand yourself better.
Oh, okay. This sounds interesting.
Right. And I don't mean like spending hours analyzing spreadsheet.
Although I do love a good spreadsheet.
I know, right?
Yeah.
It's so satisfying.
Yeah.
But what I'm talking about is more of those like small everyday things that we can track that can give us like incredible insights into our own patterns and habits.
Okay. Give me some examples.
Think of it as a fitness tracker, but for your kind of career and your well-being. So, there are apps for this, or you can just use a simple notebook, but like start tracking things like how your mood changes throughout the day or how well you're sleeping, even your productivity levels, and just start to notice, are there any patterns? Maybe you realize you're way more productive on certain days of the week or after you've had a really good night's sleep, or maybe you notice that your mood just like totally tanks every time you have a meeting with a certain colleague.
Oh, I definitely have one of those colleagues.
Don't we all? But the point is, instead of just like dreading those interactions, now you have this data. And you use it to be more proactive. So maybe you schedule like a 5-minute check-in with that person before a meeting to kind of set the tone. Or you decide those meetings are better had over the phone so you're not as affected by their, energy.
It's like the saying, knowledge is power, but in this case, it's knowledge about yourself.
Exactly. And once you have that self-knowledge, you could start making small changes to your routines, your environment, even your own reactions that help set you up for success.
I love that. This has been such an insightful deep dive. I feel like I have a whole new perspective on self-awareness.
Me too. It's so important.
It really is. And as always, we've included links to all of the Harvard Business Review articles that we talked about in the show notes, so be sure to check those out. But, before we wrap up, there's one thing that's been kind of bouncing around in my head this whole time.
Oh,
Well, we've been talking about how crucial self-awareness is for, our own individual success, less stress, better decisions, stronger relationships. But I can't help but wonder about zooming out, looking at it on a larger scale.
oh, interesting.
Like, what about organizations? If self-awareness is something that we've even heard experienced leaders struggle with, could this be one of the reasons why companies struggle with things like innovation or adapting to change?
That's a really good point.
Right. If the people at the top aren't self-aware, how can they create a culture that really embraces self-awareness, feedback, and growth?
It's all connected, isn't it?
Right. So that's something to think about. But for now, I think we've given our listeners, plenty to chew on. We talked about self-awareness as like a superpower, the difference between how we see ourselves versus how other people see us, the importance of feedback, and that why trap. We can't forget about that.
So many great takeaways.
Right. So for our listeners, just remember, self-awareness, it's a journey, not a destination. So be patient with yourselves. Start small. Make those little changes and enjoy the ride.
I love that.
And a huge thank you, as always, to you, our amazing listeners, for joining us on this deep dive into self-awareness. We'll see you next time for another fascinating exploration of ideas that matter.